All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about the silent foundation of pretty much everything that matters: influence, wisdom, connection. And we're going to see why real power, the kind that lasts, often comes from paying attention, not from making noise. You've heard this a million times, right? Some version of this idea that to get ahead, you got to be the loudest one in the room, that success is all about broadcasting, making yourself heard, and that listening is, well, it's for the weak. But what if that's just wrong? Completely backwards. What if the most powerful people aren't the best talkers, but the best listeners? That's the big idea we're going to unpack today. So let's start with how influence really works. Turns out it's a way quieter process than most of us think. Real influence is built on this silent foundation of just watching and absorbing.
Think about that classic scene from A Christmas Story. Ralphie's dad has a creative vocabulary, let's say. So later, when Ralphie lets a big one fly, everyone's shocked. Where did he hear that? Well, he didn't learn it from a lecture. He learned it by listening. He was just soaking in the reality around him.
And that just perfectly illustrates this point from James Baldwin. See, people are always listening to us, but they're not listening to our advice. They're listening to our actions. What we put out into the world, it soaks into everyone around us. So the question isn't if you're influential, it's what kind of influence are you having?
This completely reframes what listening is. It's not passive, it's not weak, it's this powerful, almost spiritual act. Tolstoy talked about it as honoring the divine beginning in other people. And Emerson said that a truly great person is always willing to be little, humble enough to quiet their own ego to actually hear somebody else.
Okay, so if listening is this superpower, why are we so terrible at it? Well, the biggest roadblock isn't all the noise out there. It's the enemy that lives right between our own two ears. The legendary surfer Laird Hamilton put it perfectly. He's talking about that voice in your head, right? The one that's always keeping score, always judging, always forming a comeback instead of just hearing. That voice is the #1 thing blocking real connection. Just look at the difference here. On the left, you've got listening to respond. This is totally ego-driven. You're just filtering what they say, judging it, and getting your next point ready. But on the right, you have listening to understand. This is about creating space. It's about suspending your own stuff for a minute and just receiving what's actually being said. So that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you actually do that? How do you silence that inner enemy and move from just responding to actually understanding? And this brings us to how this works in the real world. Because listening isn't some fuzzy, nice-to-have skill. It's the fundamental tool for building the support network that you need to do, well, anything.
Here's a kind of uncomfortable truth. In so many areas of life, your likability factor is actually more important than your technical skill. We love the myth of the lone genius, but success almost always depends on other people wanting to help you. And that all starts with connection.
President Lyndon Johnson totally got this. He knew likability was a skill, and he had a literal plan for it. He'd work on remembering names, he'd try to be like an old shoe, comfortable and easy to be around. He'd even try to find the scratchy elements in his own personality and smooth them out. But maybe the biggest thing was this idea of conversation generosity, just shutting up and letting other people talk about themselves. And here's the core principle. When you really truly listen to someone, you give them a kind of spiritual strength. You make them feel seen. You make them feel like they matter. And when you do that, people naturally give you genuine affection and support back. It's a two-way street, built entirely on attention. But here's the thing. You can't just decide to be a good listener. It's not a switch you flip. Like any other skill worth having, it takes practice. Deliberate and honestly pretty unglamorous practice. I love this quote. It's so true for everything, whether you're an athlete or an artist or a leader. That moment of glory you see in public, it was earned in thousands of private, boring hours of work. And listening is exactly the same. It is a muscle you have to train every single day. And that training, it requires a huge shift in your mindset. You have to move from that old way of thinking, which is all about competing and proving and ranking yourself against everybody else. You have to move to a growth mindset, which is just about learning and improving. It's about racing against yourself, not everyone else.
And this quote just sums it all up, doesn't it? When you finally realize that the only real competition is you yesterday, all that other noise, the jealousy, the comparison, it just fades away. And you can finally focus on what actually matters, which is your own progress.
So this brings us to the ultimate payoff. The reason to cultivate a life of listening isn't just about success or getting ahead. It's about something much deeper. It's about presence. It's about wisdom. Our constant need to talk, to plan our next sentence, to broadcast our opinions, it yanks us out of the only place where life actually happens, which is right here, right now. True listening is what anchors you to the present moment. In a way, it is the destination.
This one always gets me. It's such a stark, simple image. We spend our lives chasing and accumulating stuff, titles, accomplishments. But you can't take any of it with you. It forces you to ask, what am I actually building that lasts?
And that connects right into gratitude. You could say that gratitude is a form of deep listening. It's about paying attention, not to what's missing from your life, but to what's already here. And when you can make that shift, that constant anxious struggle for more, it just starts to dissolve.
So we'll end on this final instruction, this challenge. What if your main goal was just to become an ear? To pay attention to everything, other people, the world around you, your own body, and to have the discipline to just stop the second you hear that enemy between your ears trying to take over the conversation. What do you think you might hear in that silence?